Harvey, what day is it?
All right, today is Monday, November 29th, 2021, corresponding to the 26th day of Kislev, 5080,
Which
the
is
second night of Hanukkah.
second night of Hanukkah. Terrific. Okay, first just a update on last week's year. What I told you from Rabbi Ramon, that he says that if you light candles in a hotel, and if they tell you you're not allowed to, or if it's written down someplace, it's a mitzvah of avera. That's not his own chiddush. Rav Yasher says the same thing, and I saw Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, he says the same thing. So it seems to be that it's a well accepted idea. Also, what Alan had asked, what should he do? Bottom line, what should he do in the hotel? And I said, well, we have to ask your rabbi. So what I told Alan in the end was that he should be out to his wife sliding, because if he's going to light in a hotel, you run into all these problems of mitzvah bavera. So and then in the kitchen, in the lobby, even if they give you rishus, it could be, we saw that it's a machlokes whether that's considered a makam dira. Okay, that's from last week. So tonight I saw a very, very interesting shaila. There's a Talmud Chacham in Los Angeles by the name of Rabbi Tzvi Reisman. You know him? No, I don't know him, but he's very prolific, and he writes he has a bunch of svarim.
That's Bob and Zuki.
Oh, Bob and Zuki. Okay, I was wondering where they were. So so Rabbi Reisman, I saw on the internet, one of his articles, he discusses a fascinating question about whether if you're using Skype or Zoom to have somebody watch you light the menorah, whether that counts for Pesuma Nisa. And I guess he's like me, old-fashioned. He should have said FaceTime, or maybe there's something even beyond that. So and what exactly that means is it Pesuma Nisa? So that's what we're going to see tonight. Because it's a springboard to discuss the role of Pesuma Nisa in Hadlakas Neiros. There's a very big machlokas between the Mishnah Berurah and the Chemed Moshe about Pesuma Nisa, and it reflects on the nature of the mitzvah. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So first, the starting point is Gemara in Shabbos, and then we're going to talk about the FaceTiming on Hadlaka. The Gemara says in Shabbos, and Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, famous Gemara about Mai Chanukah. So the Gemara says, Kafsa ein zakukah. It was a machokas, if the candles burn out, do you have to relight them? So the Gemara says that halach is Kafsa ein zakukah. You don't have to relight them. So the Gemara asks, the Brisa says that the mitzvah is from the time of sunset, and there's a big machokas in Acharnim what sunset means, the first sunset, second sunset, nightfall. But either way, it's from sunset until people stop walking in the marketplace, which the Rambam says is a half hour after Tzei Sekochavim. So Mar says, "My love, the kavsa hadam adikah." If you say that you don't have to relight it, so what does it mean? What is it telling me? How long the mitzvah is? What difference does it make? If you hold kavsa in zakukah, so then why does it matter whether how that the mitzvah is until people stop walking in the marketplace? So the Mar says. The Master's Law. Adlik Madlik. It's teaching me a different. It's teaching me the basic halacha of when you're supposed to light. That you could only light within that span of time, and if you didn't light then you can't light anymore after Tichel Regel Mishuk. When people Tichel Regel Mishuk means that Rashi says there is a nation called Talmudayim, Raga Talmudayim. Rashi had the gears in the Gemara. Rago de Talmudayim. It was some nation that some population of non-Jews that lived in Israel, and they were wood choppers, or they gathered wood. So as long as they're out, so then you could light the candles. This is the basis for the big machlokas, which we talked about in previous years. Is there Pesuma Nisa for a non-Jew? Is it only for the Jews, or is it also for non-Jews? From this Rashi, everybody brings a raya that there's Pesuma Nisa for a non-Jew as well, because the Gemara uses the expression of Rashi. It's not Rashi's Gisher. In the 3 lines later, the Gemara says, "Adikaya Rigel de Talmudai." The Gemara says, when is it tichel regel mishuk? When the Talmud stop close up shop. So they from Rashi bring a raya. The Persuma Nisa applies not only to Jews but applies to non-Jews as well, because the Gemara says that the shear of how long it has to burn is as long as the Talmudayim are walking around. If the Persuma Nisa is only for Jews and not for non-Jews, who cares about the Talmudayim? That's the raya that they bring from this Rashi. But others say that it doesn't make sense that there should be a mitzvah for Persuma Nisa for a non-Jew, because they're not mitzvah mitzvah. So what are we making Persuma Nisa for that? That itself is a separate topic, and it's a very interesting philosophical discussion. But so the Gemara has two terutzim here. Why do I need to know that the Zman is from Shkia until Tichel Regel Neshuk? So one reason is because they tell me when you have to light. They tell me that the latest time you can light is when the people are still walking around. The possibility, the Gemara says, is that you need to know how much oil to put in the candle. Even though kafsa ein zaklugo, that's only if you filled it up with the shear. But if you put in only enough to last for 2 minutes, you're not going to be yotze. If you when you lit it, there was enough to last for an hour and then went out, so then you already were yotze because the mitzvah is the lighting. So you already yotze b'shas hadlaka. But it has to tell me how much is the shear. The shear is that it should be long enough to burn from the time that the shia sachama until these people stop the market. So now Tosfos has three shittas about this Gemara. Tosfos says digo adlik ma'adlik. The Gemara seems to be saying that if you don't light by the time when the Talmudayim stop frequenting the market, which is the Rambam says a half hour after Shkia, after Tzeis, then it's too late. You can't light anymore. So Tosfos says Amikam v'elach over Hazman. From after that time, the Zman is over. Nonetheless, Omari Puras, well, it's one of the Bali Tosfos, the Yesh Izar lahadlik b'layla miyad shelo ya'acher Yosemi died. You should really try to light on time. Icher yadlik misafek. But if you didn't light before Tichel Regel Neshuk, you could still light because there's a suffix. Mishane shnuye achrine. Because the Gemara has two terutzim. One is the ilo madlik madlik, and the other one is zinami shiura. So according to the second teretz, it says that the din of mishatishka chama shetichel regel neshuk is just telling you how much oil you need. So it doesn't reflect what time you have to light. It's not telling you a time to light. It's just telling you how much oil. It has to be enough oil that could last that long. So the Ri is saying that it's since the Gemara has two positions, so it remains a suffix. So therefore, if you didn't light before say Chavim, or a half hour after say Chavim, you should light anyway because it's a suffix in the Gemara. What will be with the bracha if you say that it's if it's a suffix? You wouldn't be able to make a bracha. That also says L'ri nir da'ata ein lachash masa yadli. The Ri says a different svara. Nowadays it doesn't matter when you're madlik. We could light later. Our hadlaka is primarily for people indoors. We stopped lighting outdoors because of the Goyim. So that being the case, there's no nafkamina when we don't care what time of the night you light. You're not lighting for the people in the street. You're lighting for people in the house, and therefore you could light the whole night. The Rambam has so we have two positions in Tosfos. One position in Tosfos is you could light misafek after Tichel Regel Neshuk. The second position in Tosfos, the Rebbe says l'chatchila you're allowed to light even afterwards. And the third position is the Rambam. The Rambam says ein madlik right underneath. Ein madlik in there is chana kodem shetishka chama el mishkia sul machrim amitinim. You're supposed to light by shkia. Shachar al hizid v'lo hidlik im shkia madlik v'holach ad shetichel Regel Neshuk. The kama hu zman zeh k'mo chatzi shor yeser over zman zeh ein madlik. The Rambam says that once the zman is over, finished. The mitzvah is over. So that's different. And Tosfos initially thought that that's the din. Tosfos said, "Avamikam v'yelch over zman." That's the position of Rambam. But so there's three shittas in the Rishonim. One shitta is that you can only light until Tichel Regel Meshuk. The second shitta is that you could light misafek. You could light beyond that point, and maybe you can't make a bracha. And the third shitta is that you could light because the Persuma Nisa nowadays is for people indoors, not people outdoors.
So, but with the Rambam, did they light inside by the Rambam also? Were they
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. We have to ask, what's his name? The Jewish historian that records all this year.
So what would be the latest time for Tosfot?
According to Tosas, you could light the whole night.
Is that at Chatzos or is that all night?
Tosas didn't say Chatzos.
Adavot HaShachar?
Yeah, until Alos Shachar. Yeah. Okay, Shulchan Aruch brings all three shitas. Right in the bottom. Shachar Oheziv Lo Hidlik Im Shkiyas Achama. Madlik B'chol Chad Sheticha Regel Meshuk. Shukim Mochatzi Shah. She'asa Am Over B'Shabim V'Ika B'Sum Nisa. If you didn't light by Shkia, you could light until a half hour after, he means after it says, because then there's B'Sum Nisa. Hilchot Tar Ritem V'Hashem HaKazash. Therefore, you have to have enough oil, because the Shulchan Aruch is passing like both routes with the Gemara. You have to have that amount of oil, but you also can't light after the Tichel Regel Meshuk. He says if you have extra oil, once it burns that half hour after it says, then there's no more mitzvah, and you could extinguish it if you want, or you could have enough in oil. This is a whole. We gave a few shirim on this topic in the past. Is there any mitzvah? There's no chiyuv to have a candle burn more than a half hour after it says. But are you mekayim a mitzvah if it burns longer? It's more pesuma nisa. Is it a bigger mitzvah? Is there any inyan to do that? So that's a separate topic. Then the Ramah says, so the first shita of the Shulchan Aruch is like the Rambam, because the Shulchan Aruch says that you have to light it only until Tichel Regel Meshuk. The second sheet in the Shulchan Aruch is the Ramah. Yeshar mishbizman hazesh madik mifnim and it's achizor had the kodam Tichel Regel Meshuk, and he quotes that from, I guess that stands for Darkei Moshe, probably V'tur b'Shem Tosis. When we come Tobi Zar Gam Bizman Hazeh. So the second sheet is like the Ri. Is like the Ri. That nowadays that we're lighting for the people indoors, then you're allowed to you could light even later. But chatchila, you should try to light bisman. And then the Shulchan Aruch says umihu hani milu chatchila v'mavar ze'azman v'hilik madik v'hol kol layla. So the Shulchan Aruch, even though the Shulchan Aruch initially seems to be following the Rambam, but you see that the Shulchan Aruch really doesn't hold like the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch you can light the whole night. Now, how is the Shulchan Aruch different than the Ramah? That's exactly what the Ramah says. The Ramah says you can light the whole night, and now the Shulchan Aruch is saying that if you didn't light Ad Tichel Regel Meshuk, you can light the whole night. So how are they different?
Well, he says any tzarchli zar. He just says b'diavad. That's the same thing.
Ein tzarchli zar, and he says l'chatchila b'diavad. Okay, so but I think the fundamental difference is that the Ramah says that that the reason why you're allowed to do that is because bisman hazeh we light for the people indoors. The Shulchan Aruch though is probably following the first sheet in Tosas of the Ri Poras, that since it's a suffix in the Gemara, whether there's a zman till Tichel Regel Meshuk, or is that just how much oil? So since it's a suffix Gemara, the Ri Pura says that you should light me suffix, and that possibly that's what the Shulchan Aruch is following. It's following the position of the Ri Puras. Any event, so the Shulchan Aruch, bottom line is the Shulchan Aruch says you can light all night. So now it comes along the Magen Avram on the left side, and he says Kol Laila, but Beis Yosef Kosev the Havi Sveika the Dina. So the Beis Yosef, what I just told you is that's what it says in the Beis Yosef. The Shulchan Aruch was written by the Beis Yosef. So the Beis Yosef explains why if you over Zehazman you could continue lighting. So the Beis Yosef says because it's a Sveika the Dina. Because it's a suffix, maybe we hold like Ri Puras, and therefore because it's a suffix had a paskin in the Gemara, which lashon. So that's why you could light, not because of the because we're lighting indoors. The imkein master saying levarach. Then it would come out that you shouldn't make a bracha. If the reason why you could light is because it's a suffix, so then you shouldn't be making a bracha because suffix bracha is lahakol. But the fact that since the Shulchan Aruch doesn't say you shouldn't make a bracha, it would seem like the Shulchan Aruch holds you do make a bracha. So the Magen Avraham means to say, so that's a difficulty. Why in fact should you make a bracha? Rashal kasev dafka ad chatzos. The Marshal says you can only light till chatzos. The im kein ach chatzos ein levarach. He holds you have to light before chatzos because the first Mishnah in bracha says that Chachamim were geyser on Kriya Shema that you can only light till chatzos l'harchik and aver because you might forget if you wait till later. Uvagos ma'imini kasav kol zman shebnei habayis nurim afilu ad amud hashachar. The Hagos Ma'imini says you can light until amud hashachar as long as people are up. Then there's that. This is all a quote from the Beis Yosef. So now the Magen Avraham says v'chein nirli l'haros avol im yishainim ein levarach aleihem. Magen Avraham says that if the people in the house are sleeping, then you don't light candles. That's the important part of this that I want to talk about tonight.
You don't make a bracha.
You can light, but you can't make a bracha. Ein levarach aleihem. You can't make a bracha if the people are sleeping. You have to have somebody there for Pesuma Nisa. If there's nobody awake, if you went to a chasana and you came home at 1 o'clock in the morning and you didn't light menorah yet, so it's too late. You can't light because if everybody's asleep, the only thing you could do is you could wake them up. But if you don't wake them up, you can't light with a bracha. That's the position of the Magen Avraham. Comes along. There's a sefer called Chemed Moshe, and I tried very hard to get some biographical information about the Chemed Moshe. The most I was able to find, the Mishnah Berurah quotes him often. If you look on page, where did I put it? On page 4, I put what we call the Sharbat, the first page of the Chemed Moshe, because I didn't even know when did he publish the Sefer. When did he live and when did he publish the Sefer? His name is Gedalia Moshe B'Tzihers. I don't know why there's no write-up. I couldn't even find it, even in the Chidod, in Shem Migdalim, he mentions the name of the Sefer, but it doesn't give us any information. It says here that he was a grandson, Nin V'Nechad L'Rav Yonah Nachum, who was the brother of the Shach. So now the Shach lived in the 17th century. So if his grandfather was a brother-in-law of the Shach, so he probably lived in the 18th century, and then at the bottom of the page it says they tell you when it was published. It was published in this place, Peoria. Where's that, in Italy? I don't know, Peoria. So, but it tells you what year it is. So it has. Oftentimes what they do is they quote a pasuk and then they highlight some of the letters. Orach Chaim B'Mina B'Smol Osher Chavod. That we say at the end of, what do we say that? Siyum. So the printer highlighted a bunch of letters. If you add up all those letters, it comes up to 529. So, and 520 Tuf Kuf Chav Tes is 1781. So the Sefer was published in 1781. When it was written, I don't know. I don't know if he was alive when it was published or he wasn't alive. What does it say here on the Sharbat? Does it say Shlita, or it doesn't say if he was alive or not. It just says who he was. It says also that he was a Rav in the city of Yanover, which was near Brisk. And then he went to a city called Auschwitz. So anyway, I could not find out much information about the Chemed Moshe. I just want to show you also the print in the Chemed Moshe is almost impossible to read. It's on page 3, on the top of the page. They have this is the original print, and most of the versions of the Chemed Moshe that I found on the internet and on my Chachmas Torah and my other discs that I have, this is the print they had, and I tried to blow it up so you'd be able to read it because it's very hard to read this kind of print. This is the original print, but then I discovered that they've reprinted the Chemed Moshe, which makes it 100 times easier to read. I love this kind of stuff. Do you know that on the OU website for the DAF, what do they call it? All DAF. All DAF. So they have now. There's a fellow, is a Jewish historian. What's his name? Jacobson, maybe. Abramson. He gives the historical background, which makes the DAF come alive, and then there's a guy who's a bibliotech who tells you all about the Sfarim. The fellow that runs this is Moshe Schwab. He interviewed. They're learning Tainus now, I think, right? So he interviewed him to talk about the different Sfarim that are available on Maseches Tainus. I found it so fascinating. This is a guy I never even heard of him, but he knows his Sfarim backwards and forwards. So when you have all these kind of things, it gives you a better feel, because otherwise these are random people that you don't know anything about them. You don't know where they were and when they came from and where they. I like to put it into context. So the Chemed Moshe says, the Mariel Kosev on the top of page 2. Mariel Kosev Stam Misha Shavu Lo Hidel Yochel Had Kol Layla Alos Shacher. Mariel says you can light the whole night. The Chem Ashvi Divya Smag. Okay, let's skip to them. He says she heavy a tour. She goes to Nochel Had Old Bnei Bais Neurim. Mashma Deina El Zahiris Ba'amul Chatchila. The Smag says that you should try to light when the people are awake. So that implies that it's not ma'akiv. It's not b'diavad. B'diavad they don't have to be awake, but it's better they should be awake. And then he means to say that the Mariel that says you can light all night, he means also the same thing, because usually at some point in time people go to sleep. So if you're lighting at 3 a.m, except if you're in my house where everybody's up then, so then we could presume that the Mariel also held that you can light when people are asleep. For after we did Tosus and now Mashvik Sas that didn't atta bisman is at the vinishi and carry with nay bias. Come up bisman shas gabe unay shuk. Nikom come in echem midraim. Tosus says that the reason why you can light after this man of tichel regel and shuk is because we're lighting for the bnei bias. As Tosus says, the ano ain't on a hakere el of bnei bias. So Tosus, so he says the Tosus mashra therefore that you have to have bnei bias, but he says it's not muchach. Maybe Tosh is just saying that you don't. We don't care about the people in the street. We care about the household. He says the Chemed Moshe says if you didn't light on time and then now it's later, so and everybody's asleep, you should wake up 2 or 3, because apparently Hos Persuma Nisa it requires either 2 or 3 people. If they're like my kids, that you can't wake them up, or at least some of them, and probably some of your kids too, you could still make a bracha. Because according to the Magen Avraham, so he's coming to argue on the Magen Avraham, because he's saying, according to Magen Avraham, who says that if there's nobody awake, you can't light. So what? She says, "Well, and then it comes out that if a person is away from home, even if he lights in his man, if there's nobody with him, he can't make a bracha. Because there's no presuma nisa. The Riyaz says that you could light even when you're in a non-Jewish area. So the mashma midikasa came b'shita shadu bracha. The implication is you light with a bracha. If you could publicize it, then it's better. So here you have a machlokas, the Chemed Moshe and the Magen Avraham. Could you light candles if there's nobody awake? The same issue is if you're in a hotel. If this is your case, you're going to be in the hotel by yourself. You're going to light in your kitchen. There's not going to be any presuma nisa for anybody. It's just you and the walls, so and the fixtures. So according to Magen Avraham, you can't light with a bracha. That's the position of Magen Avraham. We'll see what halacha ma'isa what we should do. Comes along.
When you wake people up, do they just have to be up for the bracha, or do they have to stay up?
No, they don't have to stay up. They just have to be up for the hadlaka.
Isn't that a bracha?
What?
Isn't that a bracha that comes with an avera when you wake somebody up?
That's an excellent question. I didn't think of that.
But here's a
What
sure-
what right do you have to wake them up?
Exactly.
Because you want to do a mitzvah, you could wake them up. That's an excellent question. I like that question. I don't know. I have to
How
think
about
about
diving on a plane when people wake you up?
it. and how about standing in the aisle in the plane
No, I'm
and
saying
you make the stewardesses'
that's a
lives
fear.
miserable and you make a chil Hashem
Yeah, that's
and all the passengers think that these Jews there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
That's why most Rabbanim say you should daven in your seat. Don't stand up and daven, even if it means not davening with a minion. Unless they don't mind, if you ask the stewardess if there's a place where we could daven in the back of the plane where we won't be in anybody's way, where you're not serving the meals, if they say you could stand in the back there, then that's okay. But otherwise, you should not. A lot of times they daven in the aisle. It's wrong to do that. So the Mishnah Berurah says, Mishnah Berurah quotes this Magen Avraham. Shulchan Aruch says you can light the whole night. So the Mishnah Berurah says, right underneath, Kol halayla adam shachar uve bracha. And you can make a bracha. V'hani dafkim dei ba'is neurim. Avam yishenim ein levarach aleihem al yad v'lo bracha. But if they're sleeping, you can't make a bracha. The komodu lihulayim bevarach el bizman pismanei sachan hayidan. In the time of the Gemara, you had to have people to make the bracha because you need Pesum Nisa. So nowadays also you need Pesum Nisa. If you don't have anybody awake, so then you light without a bracha. So it comes along the Sharet Sion, which is the Mishnah Berurah's, the Chafetz Chaim's footnotes on the bottom, Yud Zayin, he says that this statement that if they're asleep you can't make a bracha is the Magen Avraham. And what do these other things stand for? Dalad Hev Ches and Ches Aleph. Anybody know? Ches Aleph is Chai Adam, and the other one is Derech HaChaim. The Derech HaChaim was written by the Malbim, I believe. So he says, "With Sefer Chemed Moshe." So those, they agree with the Magen Avraham, but the Sefer Chemed Moshe that we just saw, Herach B'zeh, V'daitim in Shachon as V'higlik Ashi Yashna Kulam Yakas Bezel Gimel. He says if they went to sleep, you should wake them up. If you can't wake them up, Mikam Yadlik V'yavarach. We never heard of such a thing, that if you're in a place where there's no people, you should light without a bracha. Because okay, so he quotes the whole Chemed Moshe that we just saw, and then if you look at the last line, the last few words, he says v'safik brachos lahakol. So you have a machlokas, the Chemed Moshe and the Magen Avraham. So the Magen Avraham preceded the Chemed Moshe probably by 100 years. So we have a machlokas. When we call Makam, so the Mishnah Berurah says it's a suffix. So the suffix brachos lahakol, you shouldn't make a bracha. When we call Mishrotzelin Hakavas Heim Malchim Biyadam. But if somebody wants to follow the Chemed Moshe, they're allowed to. But you don't have to stop them. But he says suffix brachos lahakol, so therefore his recommendation is that you shouldn't make a bracha. So if Alan is going to light in the hotel, according to the Mishnah Berurah, you would not make a bracha.
Is your wife considered Pesumei Nisa?
Is your wife considered? Yes, your wife considered Pesumei Nisa. How many people do you need for Pesumei Nisa? Does it have to be? Because you're already thinking about lighting in your RV with your wife, and you want to know if you have to ask any of the locals to come in. So
that are not Jewish.
Yeah, maybe there's Pesumei Nisa with them.
Right.
Yeah, your wife is definitely helps to Pesumei Nisa, but it seems that that you need two or three. It's not enough to have one. You need two or three. So, but the big question.
People live by themselves.
What?
People live by themselves.
Yes, that's right. So what you're asking is the Magen Avram's position is very, very difficult because it doesn't say, that's what the Chemed Moshe said. It doesn't say any place nowadays that they're lighting indoors. So there's a population of older people or single people that are living by themselves. So none of them should make a bracha, even if they light bisman. The discussion in the Magen Avraham is all about if you're lighting late at night. But the issue is the same relevancy as when you're lighting bisman. If you're lighting bisman,
if you put a Chanukiah on the window, then and you're in a Jewish area, even if you're living by yourself.
Okay, if you put it on the window, but if you're in an area where you don't have a window,
or if you're on the 20th floor,
if it's L'mayla Michaf, so there's no Pesumei Nisa from the window.
You're Chabad Shaliach and you're in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that's right.
Does it happen count for Pesumei Nisa?
So that's as I said before. That's a big machlokas. Whether Ramosha says that Goyim do not count, non-Jews don't count for Pesumei Nisa, but Rabbi Soloveitchik held that they do. It's a big machlokas. That's good for another year. But I already did that about 12 years ago. I'm surprised that you're asking. So, oh, you were? Oh, so, okay. Okay, I stand corrected. I'm sorry. Okay, so what should you do now? So Machokas Lechem and Moshe and Magen Avram. Mishnah Berurah leans in the direction of the Magen Avram. He says it's Safik Brachas. So Ramosha has a tshuva where Moshe says in Pirsim Neis Ma'akiv and Mitzvah Nechanaka. The question is the Machokas between the Lechem and Moshe and the Magen Avram is whether Pirsum Nisa is a critical element in the Haggadah. If you don't have Pirsum Nisa, are you not Yotzei? I just want to put this into perspective. The Machlokas, the Magen Avram, and the Chemed Moshe is not if you need Pirsum Nisa. That's not the Machlokas, because everybody holds that you should have Pirsum Nisa, because that's the whole reason why in the time of the Gemara they lit when Acheticha Regel Menashuk, so that people could see the menorah. So obviously, and that's also the reason why if you light above 20 amos, you're not Yotzei, because there's no Pesuma Nisa. So there's no question that there's a din of Pesuma Nisa in lighting the menorah. So what are they arguing about then? If you see that you have to light Ad Sheticha Regel Menashuk, so obviously there's a din of Pesuma Nisa. So why does the Chemed Moshe say you could light even though everybody's asleep? So what's the answer? The answer is, anybody have an answer?
What constitutes?
No, according to Chemed Moshe, there is no Pesuma Nisa. Everybody's asleep.
Not Me'akev.
What?
It's not Me'akev.
That's right.
This is
The machlok is everybody agrees you need Pesuma Nisa. And the right way to be madik is with Pesuma Nisa. But if you didn't have Pesuma Nisa, where you yotzi the mitzvah, is it ma'akev? Excellent. Is it a critical element, or it's a heater? It's like a heater mitzvah. But it's not. Or you could say two different ways. You could say either you could say that it's only a chatchila, Pesuma Nisa, and therefore it's not ma'akev, or you could say that there's two parts to the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. One is the hadlaka, one is the Pesuma Nisa. If you light after everybody's asleep, you're not yotzei Pesuma Nisa, but you yotzei the mitzvah hadlaka. It's two separate mitzvahs. You yotzei one without the other.
So you make one less than two brachos?
No, you can make a bracha on either mitzvah. But normally, when you make a bracha, you're covering both mitzvahs. You're doing them simultaneously. Pesuma Nisa and Ner Chanukah. But if you can't do Pesuma Nisa, so the Chemed Moshe says that you didn't lose the whole mitzvah. But whereas the Magen Avram holds they're intertwined. If there's no Pesuma Nisa, as according to the Magen Avram, the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah is a mitzvah of Pesuma Nisa. That is what the mitzvah is. The mitzvah is to make Pesuma Nisa. According to Chemed Moshe, there's an independent mitzvah to light Ner Chanukah. Presumably for the person, for the guy who's lighting the candles, for him, it's not Pesuma Nisa. I wouldn't call it that, but it's to remind him of these ikarim. It's just like when you eat matzah on Pesach. You're not eating it. I mean, there's actually a din of Pesuma Nisa there too, but you're eating matzahs to remember that we went on Mitzrayim. So you're lighting the candles to remember the nace that took place on Chanukah.
It's actually a parallel with matzah. First night you have to eat matzah. It's a mitzvah chiyuvus. The rest of the time, it's a mitzvah kiyumus. So why can't you say the same thing here? That maker a din, you have to light candles. If you can be Mekayim Pesuma Nisa, fine.
Yes, you could say it. That's the first way that we said that it's not ma'akev. It's l'chatchila. That's what I said. Everybody holds l'chatchila. If somebody's going to ask you, is there any reason for me to light before 12 o'clock at night? Does it make any difference? No. The answer is for sure it makes a difference because if you light at 12 o'clock at night when everybody's asleep, you're not being mekayim the dinner of Pesuma Nisa. Is that ma'akev? Could you still light the menorah with a bracha? That's a machokas, the Chemed Moshe and the Mishnah Berurah and the Magen Avram.
What would we say that Pesuma Nisa is not good on like Zoom or anything like that?
That's what I'm coming to. I need to set the table in order to. That's exactly where we're headed. Thank you. So the Ramosha here says he says on the bottom of the page in Pirsum Hanes Ma'akiv Mitzvah Nerchana. You see how Moshe formulates it? Is Pirsum Nisa leikuva? She says Hini Aniyah Sleitim Misabim Shitas Gam Nerchanaka Ein Pirsum Nisa Ikav Letzim Chiv Hadlokas and Eres. It's not Ma'akev. Lomar the Balaka in your Pirsum Nisa Shunim Sabawakim Shalaka Inchi Yavsul Gami. That to the extent that if you don't have Pirsum Nisa, you're not going to be Yotzei. The Maishna mi Megillah the Tzarech Likro Af Kishahu Yachid. By Megillah, you're allowed to read by yourself. Kishu Yachid beBeso. Upasha Zeh Kol Kach Hashikos Rashi Megillah Aravasi Damar Bein Bisman Bein Shlo Bisman Basara. To Rak Mitzul Lachsar Avasara. Aval Yilo Ashik Hasara Lomar Ravasi Lo Likri. That it's only a Mitzul Chatchila. And so it means, okay, I didn't copy the whole thing, but he means to say that Megillah, there's also dinner Pesumah Nisa, because Chatchila is supposed to have 10 people. But if you don't have 10 people, you still read the Megillah. So why should there be a difference between Megillah and Ner Chanukah? Why should Ner Chanukah, the Pesumah Nisa, be L'ikuva, but for Megillah, it's not Makiv. So that there you have fertile territory to try to think of it. In other words, what's the position of Magen Avram? Why should Pesumah Nisa be Ma'akev by? Why should it be Ma'akev by Ner Chanukah and it's not Ma'akev by Megillah? Rav Moshe Sternbach has another raya against against the, and so Rav Moshe basically he paskins that he says that based on that raya he says that he disagrees with the Magen Avram. He passes like the Chem Moshe that it's not Ma'akev. Now Rav Moshe, I'll show you on page 9. Rav Moshe says there's a big kasha though, because if it's true, he says where we have my bar on the left column. He says l'chein af kishecha nimsa b'akim shalakashum ish sarga hadlik bebracha v'loshach potrom hadlaka kishalaka inshi. He explained barichas that I just showed you at the beginning, but he said that
it's the same tshuva.
It's the same tshuva. I forgot to write on top. It's Siman Kufay in the fourth chelek of Orach Chaim. So he says that if you're alone, you light like the Chem Moshe. V'nira shezeh ma shekasa v'shilti gibarim brings a raya from the Shilti Gibarim, because the Shilti Gibarim says ahadach sanai b'shem riyaz shenira be'enav shem haya omid ben anach. The riyaz says if you're living among, if you're together with non-Jews, afal b'shem lo bayis latzmo, and you don't have your own house, well pesach latzmo, chay v'hadik ner latzmo, you have to light a candle anyway. Afal b'shem ishto madlex v'es, even though your wife lit at home. Halacha we don't hold that way, but that's what he says. U'pirsim danachim lo mistavish echasav pirsim. And so Ramesh says that the fact that there's Pesumah Nisa for Goyim, that doesn't count, because he holds it, the not Pesumah Nisa for non-Jews. And Mikol Chal Mechayv HaHadlik Avli She'etzem Hadlaka Ha'yatza B'Hadlaka Sishto. So he says, so you see, okay, I didn't underline, but he's showing you that you see that even though there's nobody there, and he's lighting on his own, he's Mekayim the mitzvah. So, but then Ramesh asks a tremendous kasha, a bam kasha. He says, where I have it underlined further down. He says, in Ken Kasha, Halishna dat Shitticharegam Mishuk, Digo Adik Madlik, the Gemara says that the shear of Ticharegam Mishuk is to tell you that if you didn't light by then you can't light anymore. Shipir Shitosis over Zman. Tosis that it means to say that after Ticharegam Mishuk, the Zman is over, V'chein Pasuk Rambam, and he says, and the Shulti Gibarim Atzmo, I'm going where it's underlined. Kasav was so Sashay Yachal Hadlik, Amikam Yachal Hadlik, Batla Mitzvah. Shulti Gibarim says himself that after this man of Ticharegam Mishuk, he can't light. For who's over the Lond Iftar, Metzim Mitzvah Hadlaka, Bishvilian Pirsam. The Af Kishurak Yachal Levado Madlik, Uvar, Shulchar Stir Gadol. Ramesh says, tremendous stira. On the one hand, you need to have, you have to light in order to have Pesumah Nisa. And so obviously you need Pesumah. You see that Pesumah Nisa is a critical element, because the Gemara says that afterwards you can't light. Until Tichel Regem Meshuk, you're allowed to madlik. Mikam be'elach, any yochel hadlik. And that's what the Riyas is beferish, that after that you can't be madlik. That's like the sheet of the Rambam, that you can't be madlik after Tichel Regem Meshuk. So why can't you be madlik? So you can't be madlik because you don't have Persuma Nisa. So if that's the case, so then how come? How could you say that Persuma Nisa is not Ma'akev, and that you can light in the middle of the night without anybody around? You see, Persuma Nisa is Ma'akev. That's Ramos's Bam Kasha. So Ramosha says, "V'tzarach Omer came into B'tchilos Halayla who gams man sheikar pirsum kol regel minashok." He says, since the beginning of the night is the time when there is pirsum, and gam below zeh hayikar hazman d'zizim makdim, and that was the best time to light because of zizim makdim. Lo ratzul sakin sheizman hadlaka b'di'eved gam achar zman b'shvil elu she'en choshen uzrizus. They didn't want to make a zman for people that are not worried about zizim aktivim and choshen mitzvahs men amufar she'en ratzul levatal mulachtan. The people that don't want to light early, it's because they want to stay at their business. So Chazal didn't institute a zman hadlaka. That's what he's saying is like this. Me'ikar din hagemara, you have to light until you can only light until tichel regel min hashuk. Tosas says a very big chiddush, the bisman hazeh, that we light indoors. You don't have to worry about tichel regel min hashuk. But in the time of Chazal, the takana was I should tichel regel min hashuk. So the question is, what do I care tichel regel min? Why after that you can't light? You can light even if there's no people. So Ramesh says because when they made the original takana, they made it that you have to light at a time when there's Pesuma Nisa, not because Pesuma Nisa is ma'akiv. If there'll be nobody around, you could light anyway. Because Pesuma Nisa is not ma'akiv. But what is ma'akiv is that you should light at a time when there could be Pesuma Nisa. The Chazal set a certain time. The time that they set was between that window from Shkia until Tichel Regel Min Hashuk. That's the time that they set for the Hadlacha. And they set that time because they wanted you to do the mitzvah the right way. There's two parts to the mitzvah, there's Hadlacha and Pesuma Nisa. So therefore, that was the time that they set. And before the people started lighting indoors, once that time is over, you won't be Yotzei. But you can't prove from there that that Pesuma Nisa is Ma'akiv, because really, it's only this issue of Tichel Regel Min Hashuk is only the Zman that they established. But it's not that you have to have so that means that if you're living alone, you could light even in the time of Chazal when they said that you could only light at Tichel Regel Min Hashuk, still you could light on your own. Why? If you need Tichel, if you have to light for people who are in the market, so why can you light on your own? That's what Rashi is saying. That the Zman that they set for the mitzvah was that window. So, but and they did it so because l'chatchila you should have Pesuma Nisa. But if you didn't have Pesuma Nisa, it's also b'di'evid you could continue lighting.
So according to this b'di'evid opinion that you're allowed to continue lighting, is that was in fact a l'chatchila zman. There was always a b'di'evid you could light later, or that doesn't sound.
No, so yeah, I hear that's yes, excellent. The zman of this window that they established became nullified. That's the chiddush of Tosas. The Tosas says that nowadays that we're lighting indoors, that window is no longer applicable.
Yes. So what was that first opinion in Tosas? What was this?
The first opinion in Tosas was that there's two terutzim in the Gemara. So according to second teretz, actually Tichel Regel Min Hashuk is not as man.
It was not as much.
No, it's just a shear in the oil.
Shear in
So
the oil.
if lighting indoors in Europe because it was dangerous, that nullified the concept of that time element. So now that we have electricity, people driving around in Detroit when it gets dark at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, should that not change the situation also?
Yeah, and why shouldn't we light outdoors now? But it's still dangerous to light outdoors.
Well, in Israel, they do it a lot.
What? In Israel, but this is not Israel. I don't recommend it so much in America. But you see, what Tosas says is a tremendous chiddush, because if Chazal originally were Misake and his man, what right do we have to light indoors and make up our own zman?
Right.
That's what we're trying to get at.
And is it anything like what we've been talking about the last few weeks?
Yeah, it's exactly like we've been talking about. That it's a davar she'b'minyan. Once Chazal were Misake and his man, how can we go ahead and introduce a new zman? It's a pella. And the teretz to the Magen Avram. I mean, the Chemed Moshe's Kash of the Magen Avram is a baum. and it's such a disturbing kasha that he's saying, according to Magen Avram, if you're alone, you can't light with a bracha. We never heard of such a thing.
Although he doesn't actually say that, it just implies it.
Well, what's the difference?
Well, 'cause maybe,
if you
'cause
have
maybe
to,
if you light in the Zman.
oh, okay, now you're on the ball. So that's the answer. The answer to Magen Avram is that when you light bisman, you don't have to have persumanis. It's not ma'akev. It's only when you light after the zman that it's ma'akev.
Because the only excuse you had why after Zman was the B'nai B'aya seeing it. That was really the only, maybe.
Well, that's the structure of the teretz, but exactly how it makes sense is I don't know. I don't know how to work it out. Rabbi Yerucham Olshin, who's a Rosh Yeshiva Lakewood, has about 20 pages on this topic, and that's basically that's what he says, and he quotes others from him to say the same thing. That the teretz of the Magen Avram is that when you light bisman, it's not ma'akev pursuing nisa, but if you light the rest of the night, it is ma'akev. That's. But he himself says it's hard to understand why. If you say that pursuing nisa is ma'akev, so then it should be ma'akev even if you light bisman.
Because the whole excuse for lighting inside was that you made the P'sur Nisa the people inside, and now there's no people inside. That, somehow it seems related.
So you know what it's doing is it's adding another layer of changing the takanas of chachamim who are these people that decided they could light indoors and they made on top of it they said if you do light indoors you have to make sure that if you light outdoors you don't need presuming nisa. But if you light indoors,
well, you need it, but that's why you.
But it's not ma'akev. It's not ma'akev. Why would they? If they changed it, that now they're lighting indoors, you could light the whole night. Why did they change the tzura? Why did they say that presuming nisa is ma'akev more than it was ma'akev in the old days when you're lighting outside? It's not ma'akev. This is all a big dilemma.
But the shetichla regel minashut, isn't that out the window these days anyway? Didn't we say that? Because people are up all night. People are things that, it's not like it used to be where, comes a certain time, everybody goes in and they never go out anymore.
Yeah, so that's also an excellent question, which I probably discussed in the past.
Yeah. It's not really true around here. Like nobody's walking around anywhere.
Okay, but let's say you're in a neighborhood. But let's say you're in Borough Park, where there's no tichla regel minashuk. Is there a mitzvah? Is it different to light in Borough Park a longer halacha, and is it a special? In other words, even though the Shulchan Aruch says that after tichla regel minashuk you could blow it out, what about bisman hazeh? What about if you're living in a neighborhood where there are people walking? That's what's inherent in Alan's question.
When I lived in Queens, where the house is right in front of a bus stop, there was always people. Everybody on the bus.
So there's a famous story about the Brisker Rav that the Brisker Rav used to light his candles later because he lit it for till the last showing in the movie theater was over, so that the people were coming out. There should be presuming nisa for those people. Okay, this whole sugya is a big dilemma, and I didn't see anybody that has I didn't see so many things, but it's
when the Rambam describes it, he doesn't say pure sumi nisa. He just says he just talks about zman and techla rahushuk, and we're assuming that aren't we like kind of applying the terminology of Persumi Nisa and superimposing on it? That's what the Rambam means.
Yeah, but why should it matter? Why should it matter?
Do we define it as a zman, or do we define it as an experiential requirement of? Yeah,
but it's both probably. It's a zman, but it's a zman based on has to be people.
Originally, it was a zman that had to have experience, and then they just since you can't experience.
No, but you're asking if the Rambam holds that you need Persuma Nisa. Why would they make such a zman if you didn't need Persuma Nisa?
Rabbi can quote from the previous halacha, but I believe in halacha Gimel and Dalet, he starts off saying that the primary purpose of the Hilaskanif is.
Okay. All right. We'll have to look.
If you want to talk about the other thing, you better.
So here's the big question that Rabbi Reisman. Now that we've explained the machlokas between the Chemed Moshe, and so Lamaisa, before I talk about that, people ask me what to do if they're in a hotel. I've told them they can make a bracha because even though the Mishnah Berurah says Safik bracha hakol, but Kedai Ramosha Lismach Alav. That's Ramosha in America. Ramosha was the posek hador. So I've told you many times that the hardest part of for a rabbi like me is to figure out who we should follow. It's easy to find 100 different positions, but like, who do you select in the end? So I generally, I mean, the thing is, we don't do everything Ramosha says. For example, Ramosha says you can't use liquid soap on Shabbos, and most people use liquid soap. And Ramosha says you can't use a Shabbos clock to turn on the air conditioning on Shabbos. Okay, nowadays most people are central, but in the old days when we had standalone units, and probably there's still some standalone units someplace. So Ramosha says you can't use a Shabbos clock. Okay, but I don't. That's what I've been Saimach on Ramosha to tell people that they could light with a bracha, but it's still better to. You see, I didn't even think it through. Mishnah Berurah says that if you're away, I'm going to come to the end of our share in a minute. But the Mishnah Berurah says that if you're away, that l'chatchila you should light yourself, because since it's in of Neri Mahadran is that everybody should light themselves. So l'chatchila you should light yourself and not be samach on your wife's hadlaka. So he says, but if you're going to light yourself, there's a problem of once you yotze but with your wife, mikra, then you yotze with your wife, because the mitzvah is neri shaveso, so you already have a candle in the house. So once you yotze with your wife's hadlaka, how are you allowed to make a bracha? So Mishnah Berurah says what you should do is you have to. That's what some of the poskim say. You have to light before your wife. You have to light earlier than she does, and that way you can make a bracha because you're not yotze with her hadlaka. But then the question is, or he says you should be mechavin not to be yotze with hadlaka. But what he doesn't deal with the issue that if you're away and there's no presuma nisa, maybe it's better to be yotze with your wife, because if you're yotze with your wife, you'll have presuma nisa, and if you light on your own, see, that's your case. Now that you could light candles in the kitchen because you have the fire there and everything, but maybe it's still better that you should be yotze with your wife, because you're going to light. Where are you going to be, in the middle of what? Jacksonville. Is anybody Jewish there?
Yeah, there's a beautiful big shul.
That was a big shul, but near where the hotel is?
Not near where the hotel is.
And you don't know what floor you'll be on. So that's, I never thought about that. That's an interesting question. It's better to be yotze with your wife in order to have presuma nisa. So, but here's Rabbi Reisman's shayla. The shayla is, according to the Magen Avraham, that says that you need presuma nisa. And if everybody's asleep, then you can't make a bracha. And the Mishnah Berurah says, Safik bracha hakol, you should be noyeg like the Chaim Moshe. So let's say you light the candles and you turn on Skype, or even better, you use your cell phone and you FaceTime. So now that you FaceTime you're in California, you FaceTime to your kids in New York City or wherever they are, in New Jersey. So now you have presuma nisa, because they're watching the hadlaka on the internet or on the FaceTime. So is that sufficient to be called presuma nisa? So what would the Olam say to that question?
Maybe.
Yeah. So answering a main is, first of all, most of the I wanted to write a tshuva about this and send it into a magazine. I just didn't have time. Most of the contemporary poskim said during COVID that you could answer Amen if you hear, because since mechitza shabarzal, there's no mechitza barzal mechaitzes between Avinu Shemayim, so you're allowed. And the Gemara says that in Alexandria they put up the flag, so they didn't hear the bracha, they still answered Amen. So what's the difference if you know they're making a bracha? It's not considered that you heard it, but you don't have to hear it to answer Amen.
For presuma nisa, you don't need a bracha, do you?
You don't need a bracha. What?
We did give 3 shiurim during COVID about why, even though you may answer Amen or could answer Amen, why you can't be mitzvah for Davar Shabbat.
That's right. You remember.
More comparable to being mitzvah for Davar Shabbat, because in the end you need the person there to have.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't. But to me, it seems that you don't need siruf. It's not presuma nisa is nothing to do with siruf. Those shittas that say you have presuma nisa with a non-Jew, you don't. It's not called the mitzvah for me. It's a mitzias. If somebody sees it, so there's presuma nisa. There's no. It's not a halachic connection that you have. I mean, that's the basis of the shayla. That since you don't need to have a minyan, you don't have to have any particular connection. You don't have to know who the people are. You don't have to know anything. As long as there's people. So Lamaisa, they see you lighting, says Besuma Nisa. So, to me, Rabbi Reisman wants to say that it's okay, and he says, because the poskim say, he quotes, he has a whole long list of poskim that say that you could include non-Jews in the Besuma Nisa. So he says if you could include non-Jews, so the internet is not worse than including non-Jews. He says it's a very loose system. This Besuma Nisa, because you see you can look at it later if you want. It's on page 8. And he says. If you look at the last line on page 8, he says that you could light with a bracha with if you're using Skype, not only according to the Chemed Moshe, but even according to Magen Avraham, you could light with a bracha when you have the internet going. Because it's the whole idea. He says that if you Soloveitchik said that if you hold that the Pesuma Nisa includes a non-Jew, it's because Pesuma Nisa is Kiddush Hashem, and Kiddush Hashem applies even to non-Jews. So he says if you need to make a Kiddush Hashem, so you have a Kiddush Hashem. So it shouldn't matter that you're doing it over the internet.
But it doesn't qualify for Ner Isha Beisra, though. Does it? Suppose I'm late in the hotel room. My wife's, I'm Skyping with her, and she's at the house. It's not. In the
she doesn't.
It's not my house.
Oh no! It doesn't take care of your house, right? There's a separate chiyuv in your house. That's right. I mean, you wouldn't be yotze if somebody makes a bracha. Okay, yeah, all right. So, what do you want to say?
Would the security component of it matter? Like, theoretically, on the internet, I could be streaming anything.
And therefore?
I could, be lighting a candle and streaming it, or I could be showing him a video of what I lit 2 hours ago.
Yeah, but the person needs to know. We don't care what the people know, but if the guy that's streaming is doing it live, so then he could.
But what if the person who's seeing it
doesn't know? So what if he doesn't know? So who cares? He's seeing it. So you have the Pesuma Nisa.
Certainly doesn't hurt if you say you're making a bracha anyway, right? I mean,
if you hold like the Chemed Moshe and Ramoshe, you can make a bracha anyway. But the Magen Avraham, if you follow the Mishnah Berurah, you can't make a bracha. So to me, though, it would seem I would strongly say that it's not called Pesuma Nisa, because there's no question that the experience of seeing Hadlakas Neiros live is not the same as seeing it on FaceTime. It's just not the same. Or like seeing it on television. It's not the same. You're not there. So who said that level of Pesuma Nisa, the whole idea of Pesuma Nisa is it has an impact on the guy that's seeing it? Who said that a diminished impact is sufficient for Pesuma Nisa? I mean, they didn't have that metzius in time of Chazal that you could watch it on television. But we have no right to decide that a televised Pesuma Nisa is also called Pesuma Nisa. I saw Rabbi Litzky sent me the Rav of the Kosel Maravi is Rabbi Rabinowitz. He wrote a tshuva. He had a similar question. If you've been to the kotel, if you've been there within 30 days, you don't have to do kriya. What happens if you haven't been there within 30 days, but you saw it on Zoom, the kotel camp? Does that count? So first he says that it should count, but then he says maybe the whole idea is that if you've seen it, then seeing it gives you agmas nefesh. So if 30 days haven't passed, you still have agmas nefesh. So he says maybe if you're seeing it on Zoom, the level of agmas nefesh is much less. And then the Rabbi Reisman notes that the Ravad Yosef and B'tzel Chochma have a shayla. When could you make if you see a king? You're supposed to make a bracha for seeing a king. Could you make the bracha if you see him on television? They have a long discussion, but in the end, he makes a distinction. Maybe I'll show it to you next week because it's an interesting tshuva, what he says about making the bracha of what's the bracha on the king? Shenasa mikvodo b'asar v'dam. So if you see, the whole idea is you're overwhelmed by seeing a king. It's an amazing thing. You see the covet of the king. So maybe if you see it on FaceTime, maybe it's also good. So, but both Tzel Chachma and Rabbi Yosef thought not. So he wants to compare the two things that you. And the bottom line is, to me, it's partial. It's a diminished Pesumanisa if you use FaceTime. I thought it was a good springboard for a shear, but I wouldn't recommend it in practice.
No one said you could make a harder.
In order to say the bracha.
That's a machlokas. According to Mishnah Brura, you do need it. According to Mishnah Brura, I mean, I said you could follow Moshe. I'm sure in Eretz Yisrael, people follow Mishnah Brura.
You added the
What?
possibility that if you do it Bisman, that's a different story.
Yeah, I mean that's depending on what the answer is to the to the Chaim Moshe's kasha. Okay, I wish everybody a Freilich Chanukah.
No one said you say Shekocho for Somalei alone if you hear thunder on TV, I'm assuming.
No,
So,
nobody.
or